Welcome to the January 2022 meeting of the Middle Tennessee chapter of Wild Ones. Tonight we welcome Mary Ann Fox, who is a horticulturalist and biological technician with the Olmstead Parks Conservancy in Louisville, Kentucky. Unfortunately, the recording missed the early part of Mary Ann's presentation and picks up near the end of her information about Frederick Law Olmsted.
That everyone should be able to experience these parks regardless of their age, their financial status, gender. Everyone is welcome. The parks are for the people. And we really believe that. He was a conservationist. He was an egalitarian. He was inspired. The story I've heard is that in Birkenhead Park in England, he saw just that intermingling of socioeconomic status. He saw someone, an impoverished person and a wealthy person sitting on a bench talking to each other. And he saw that as a beautiful form of democracy, of a way to interact between each other and intermingle. And he thought that was extremely valuable. He believed that they shaped the culture, and he understood that parks need to be respected and conserved to be appreciated by everyone. And then the identifying characteristics of his designs are graceful topography and alignments, ease, accessibility, and multi-use. All things that you see over and over and over again when you're looking at park systems or natural areas that he was involved in the design of. So now I get to introduce you guys to the Louisville parks. Oh, and something that I meant to say at the very beginning. So I had not heard of Wild Ones before I met Richard, but it turns out there's a Louisville Wild Ones chapter. And there are a couple of our park stewards who I believe were involved with Wild Ones even before the Park Stewardship Program exists. I know that they were hacking at Honeysuckle in Cherokee Park before the Olmsted crew was hacking at Honeysuckle. And they also helped get a grant that allowed us to plant some trees back in 2019 in parts of Cherokee Park. And so that's Jerry and Portia Brown of the Louisville chapter of Wild Ones. So I think we're all much more connected than we realize. And I just thought that was so cool to find out. But now I bring you to Cherokee Park. So when Olmsted first came to Louisville, he designed the 3 flagship parks of the Olmstead Park system, which is the initial 3 flagship parks connected by a series of parkways. So this is Cherokee Park. It's 389 acres. Now it has an adjacent park, Seneca Park, and so there's actually 950 acres of connected green space with multi-use trails. It's a limestone base of rolling hills and valleys are what characterize this, with Beargrass Creek kind of running through it at the bottom. And so the hiking trails take you kind of over and back down through the creek and over and back down through the creek. Throughout the park, you can see this is, I think, Behringer Spring. Actually, there are several springs that connect into Beargrass Creek there in the valley. And then you have these slopes on the hillsides that are full of beautiful native wildflowers and trees and shrubs, and it's a beautiful park. It's our easternmost park. It is old pasture land. The key features that people see: Beargrass Creek, Behringer Hill, Cochran Hill. These are all spaced kind of around in one big circle, and there's a scenic loop. It's 2.4 miles that takes you, it's a paved path all the way throughout, so you can enjoy a leisure stroll, or there's also mountain biking trails and hiking trails and walking trails. So there's a variety of ways to enjoy the park. Iroquois Park was the second flagship park, and this is our southmost park. And I have here, there's 2 images. Iroquois Park is unique because it exists on a knob, really like a foothill of the Appalachian Mountains. So whereas Cherokee kind of has several hills that encompass it, Iroquois is just one big hill. And on top of it is Summit Field. So you see we have prairie meadow, a little bit of a savanna feel to it with the large oak tree there. And then on the adjacent all around the slope are these this is our oldest forest in the park system. Just filled, very, very much so protected. It's one of our cleanest parks as far as invasive species are concerned. And a lot of people come to Iroquois Park to enjoy at the top of the knob. You can hike all the way up to the knob. There is a paved road. It's been closed for a while. There's been talk about reopening it. So to make these uppermost parts more accessible. But the northern overlook is neat because Iroquois Park sits south Louisville, then the northernmost part of Iroquois Park from up on top of this hill, which is the, I believe, second tallest hill in Jefferson County, aside from maybe a knob in Jefferson Memorial Forest. It allows you to look over the entire city of Louisville that lies ahead of you. So there's this, Olmsted would design these winding paths. You never really knew where you were going. The idea was to enjoy the experience and then happen upon whatever it was that was at the end of your path. So you might notice in some of these pictures, whenever there's a trail, it just kind of wanders off and, oh, maybe there's something interesting over there and maybe we should follow that trail to the end to see what's there. And that's how the Northern Overlook is designed. There's also an amphitheater there that hosts concerts all summer long, all year long. Summit Field is a hot spot. There's also sports fields in all of these parks. There's a disc golf course at Iroquois, golf courses at all of these parks, basketball courts, tennis courts, so widely used in a variety of ways. And then Shawnee Park is our third park. It's our third flagship park. It's 254 acres. It's our westernmost park, so it sits right on the Ohio River. It also has a paved path that circles around. This is a 1.5-mile scenic loop. But my favorite part about Shawnee Park is the river walk. And it's truly right along the Ohio River, which anytime you're alongside a huge, vast body of water, it's humbling and it just adds so much to your experience. So along the river walk, where the temperatures are cooler in the summer and there's lush green canopy, that's one of my favorite places to work. There's also a lily pond with chess tables around it. We've done some projects on the lily pond this year. And then there's the Great Lawn, which in the past has been known for big ball fields. Baseball was really big here. Now it's just an open lawn. There's also a bandstand in the park, so there used to be concerts. A lot of these parks used to have large ornamental gardens, actually, back when the Louisville park system had, I just think, more staffing, more people to take care of finer detailed gardens. But this is Shawnee Park, and that is the third flagship park. And I'm going to show you this map. So there are 17 Olmsted parks. The 3 flagship parks were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, while the remaining parks were designed by the Olmsted Brothers firm. So we started with, you'll see in the top right here, I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse when I move it. I might be able to use it as a pointer. But over here is Cherokee Park. Great, thank you. And you'll see Eastern Parkway here connects, and then Southern Parkway will take you down to Iroquois Park. Algonquin Parkway will take you down to Shawnee. And then next to Shawnee, we have Chickasaw. There's Central Park, Algonquin Park. A lot of these parks are neighborhood pocket parks, and then some of the parks are also neighborhood parks. Neighborhoods surround every park is a neighborhood park, truly, and they're widely used by the neighborhoods that surround them. But just some of them are larger than others and have a little bit more room to spread out. Oh, and yeah, the Olmsted Groves firm collaborated with Louisville until 1935. So that was the time of Olmsted, and that was a great and exciting time to be involved in park planning. But then we had two world wars, and we had depression, and we weren't able to care for our parks as much, and parks kind of fell to the wayside. Invasive species started creeping in. A lot of them planted initially before we even knew they were invasive. And also, I think there's just a lot of not really understanding conservation techniques that would be vital to the park's health. So over the century, you saw a lot of decline in our parks. And then there was a huge tornado that hit Louisville in April 1974. There were already, I believe, grassroots efforts in the mix building up to pushing to focus more on the parks, especially Cherokee Park, which is what's pictured here. This is our Daniel Boone statue that used to exist inside the park and then was ultimately moved here to be an entrance to welcome people into our park, I guess. He sits there proudly, and this bed is full of huge wild native perennials that really make it glow in the summertime now. But as you can see, we had significant damage, especially to the woodlands in 1974. And this was a huge problem for Cherokee Park because, as a lot of you probably know, when the tree canopy opens up, invasive species creep in. There is sunlight, there's no competition, everything's clear, and they are like, let's party, like, let's come hang out because this is where we want to take over. And so there was a huge push from the grassroots. The Friends of Olmstead Parks is the name of what they call themselves, and they pushed for the establishment of what ultimately became Olmstead Parks Conservancy. So Olmstead Parks Conservancy, the plan was designed by and approved, not designed by, but approved by Mayor Jerry Abramson in 1989. Pictured here, you'll see Susan Rademacher. She was the first president of Olmstead Parks Conservancy, and she's here. I believe these two men are with Andrew Kogan Associates, a firm in Philadelphia that helped with the master planning of our parks. And they worked together to develop a master plan for specifically our three flagship parks, Cherokee, Iroquois, and Shawnee, with the main goal being to restore and enhance and forever protect the parks by means of creating a historic landscape plan based on ecological restoration. The four most frequent, the main topographic types that we have in our parks are forest, woodland, meadow, and greensward, or just turf space. And our primary issues in the parks were identified as erosion from the environment and heavy use and misuse of the parks and the trail systems, invasive plants smothering the native plant communities, and inaccessibility. Three things that were identified as primary concerns that OPC was designed to address. The other big thing that they were wanting to establish as they established Olmstead Parks Conservancy was a stronger relationship to the park users. They wanted to generate more park users. They wanted more people to come into the parks, to use the parks, and restore it back to the cultural staple that it had been in the past. And they also wanted to do it in a way that encouraged park users to take responsibility for their park and take ownership of their park and realize, oh, we come here, we enjoy it, this is our neighborhood, and we can, and do things to participate and help take care of it. And the other major thing that OPC wanted to be sure that we included in our master planning was a monitoring program. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just saying, let's take care of our parks forever without any accountability. So they included accountability in the master plan, which I think makes for a really strong master plan. And so just a little snippet to show you kind of what the master plan entailed. Here is a graph of kind of existing conditions at the time that the master planning committee was surveying the park properties, and they, with informed decision making, would propose, okay, so we understand that we can't just have, you'll see here there's just mowed turf right up next to the path, and then the smothering invasive species in the woodlands. There was a fundamental understanding that you need healthy woodlands so that you have healthy trees. Healthy tree canopy makes for healthy woodlands. And there's a management aspect involved with the meadows, the prairies, the grasses, and the meadow edge along the woodlands that is necessary for woodland health. And really kind of the instigator of new woodlands, truly, when you see a prairie, when you see a meadow, what it wants to do is it does want to ultimately become a woodland, and grazing, herd grazing, cattle grazing, prescribed burning, those types of things help keep the meadow in its meadow state. But the woodlands are constantly trying to take over, and the meadows are constantly trying to turn into woodlands. And you'll see some photos about that here in a little bit. So fast forward to today. This is my boss. This is my boss, Nick, and his boss, Major, who's also my boss, and my coworker, Wilson, and we are planting trees. This is Cherokee Park. We are on a spot called Chauffeur's Rest, and this is one of those areas that here you can see it's mown turf. Just beyond that ridge side is prairie and meadowland that we're still trying to develop a strong management strategy for. And we're looking at this area. Tennis courts used to sit here. And so in the past few years, the tennis courts have been removed. The soil has been manipulated, and we're in like phase 1 of installing a tree grove throughout this park. And we actually this morning planted 3 more dogwoods right over here behind the skid steer. So that was fun. But so we've gotten to work. We plant trees in the parks. We identify areas where there are canopy gaps, and we plant trees according to ecological needs such as that. But we also have a strong memorial program where we plant, it's memorial and celebrations program. We plant trees, and we build benches and install benches throughout the park. And so that is something else that takes up some of our time when we install those, but it's also a way that we include people in the parks. We garner profit through that as well to keep planting trees in the parks. So that's a key aspect to our development as well. We also, accessibility, huge. Olmsted was a huge advocate of accessibility. And so another thing that we do, so I guess I should explain, we work really closely with Louisville Metro Parks. We are not Louisville Metro Parks. We're a nonprofit that exists very closely in a close relationship with Louisville Metro Parks and Rec. So they have a forestry department, and they come into our parks, and all there. I mean, there are hundreds of Louisville parks outside of the Olmstead parks, and so we exist to be able to come into a park that maybe would be neglected because of the long list of other parks that also need attention. So we come into the Olmstead parks to try to address issues as fast as possible. So this was a situation where this huge, over 100-year-old ash tree fell over a path, and this is my crew. This is Wilson. here on the log, and Nick and Lauren, and we cleared a trail that day. So that's the other thing that we spend a lot of time doing. We're not managing natural areas. We are addressing accessibility issues or security issues in the parks if possible. That's not always our role. And installing benches or planting trees. And so I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about one of our ongoing projects, the Great Bush Honeysuckle Removal of Ladybird Johnson Woods. This is a part of Seneca Park, which is adjacent to Cherokee Park. It's that continuous 950-mile stretch of land. And it is a project that I've only come into the middle of. So I've been with Olmstead Park since March. This project has been going on a few years before me, at least. And this area of the woods, this is an example of what a lot of the park's woodlands, this is what the parks look like. And what you're seeing is bush honeysuckle stumps. I mean, everything that you see in the understory here is bush honeysuckle almost exclusively. And on the other side of the path, you notice that there's absolutely nothing except for, you're probably seeing some Linus or Japonica, Japanese honeysuckle vine on the ground, maybe some euonymus there, but there's no understory because of how aggressive and massive the honeysuckle became that just suffocated everything out, as well as tree seedlings. And that's why it's so important to remove these plants. They're not serving our ecosystem. They're not serving, host insects or wildlife much usually. And they also are so aggressive that they smother the trees that would come up to preserve the canopy, to help keep that sun away so that the other invasives don't come in and they all intermingle. It is a huge undertaking. So I just wanted to show you kind of where we're at now. We are in the process of continuously clearing these honeysuckles. And then, so this is another area of LBJ. This is my coworker, Matthew. He is pulling on grapevine, which is a native plant that we love. But as you can see where we've removed, you see all the honeysuckle debris here on the bottom. And it's a young woodlands. There's not much tree canopy. You see all that blue sky. And so aggressive vines take over. And we, even after we come in and remove the bush honeysuckle, have to monitor, okay, now that that plant is out of the way, what other plants do we need to watch for and make sure that we're not creating another problem by getting rid of one problem. This whole project was started also by one of our park stewards who, the way our park stewardship program is set up, they can come in and they can take a management area. And so we had someone come in and decide Ladybird Johnson Woods was their management area and they were going to get rid of all the honeysuckle. And so in 2020, if you can imagine, this park steward spent 1,000 hours in these woodlands hacking away at honeysuckle, and that really paved the way for us to come in a lot easier and a lot faster, to come behind him and help remove what was left. And here is my coworker Lauren. There's Wilson and Major behind her, but this is an area of Ladybird Johnson Woods. This was one of the foremost, most initially cleared areas. And so you can already see it's right along the creek, but it's booming with native wildflowers. We found all kinds of lobelia, great blue lobelia. There's Indian tobacco lobelia, I think, and blue mist flower, a lot of really cool things right along that river just there. So I'm excited to see the future of these woodlands. I also wanted to share with y'all a little bit about our management practice, how we acquire information, how we decide where in our parks to go, what to prioritize. And I'm actually going to skip 2 slides ahead, and y'all will pretend like you didn't see any of those yet. But so this is the program that the Team for Healthy Parks, so me and the coworkers I work with every day, this is the program that we use to monitor what we're doing in the parks and where and with what species. So we use ArcGIS field maps powered by Esri here in Louisville. Here's a map of data that we've collected for all of our parks in Louisville. Here's Iroquois and Shawnee over here by the Ohio, and Cherokee over here with all of our neighborhood parks scattered throughout. And then this is the Lady Bird Johnson woods that I was just telling y'all about. So we'll go in and we'll mark off segments where we were working. We'll account for herbicide use. We'll account for anything of note. And then we have a coworker who heads up she's our projects manager, Liz Winlock. She operates our GIS data, manipulates it, and turns it into maps for us to utilize. She and Major, our projects director, came up with this system. This is new this year. So they came up with a 200 by 200 meter grid system. And this is a map of Iroquois Park. And I know it's very blurry. I really just wanted you to see this grid system. This is a snippet of microstudium presence in Iroquois as of October of last year. And then you can see here on the side, green is 0 all the way up to 4 of greatest presence in the parks. So when you're looking at this map, if it's pink, we've got microstudium. If it's green, we are in the clear. And I'm sure that that will closely correlate to the canopy of the trees in that area. So this system, she took us out in October, and we would hike to each of these points. And she used a tool to manage or to view the tree canopy and assess the coverage for any of these given points, so we could identify canopy gaps. And she also, we would walk around about 10 yards away from this point and just check for invasive species around as well and record any of the invasive species that we saw. And so this gave us an idea, okay, what's going on in our parks, what are we seeing, and how bad is it? And that way we can prioritize. Really what we prioritize is areas of the park that are the least disturbed. And in some cases, I guess I shouldn't say that as a blanket statement, but sometimes the area that we want to work in is the area with the least invasives because we want to keep them out. And these are the plants that, after assessing what we've been seeing last year, the years before, these are the plants that we've been worried about. We're becoming more worried about. Acaranthes japonica, chaff flower. It's a terrible plant. I wasn't familiar with it before this year. Its seed heads have little hooks on them. So when you or a hiker or a deer or other critter in the woodlands runs by it, they all hook onto your clothes or your fur and take off to go wherever you go and then get planted somewhere along the way. And microstudium seems it's like it's taking over parts of the woods, especially really sunny parts. Porcelain berry, I don't know if you guys have porcelain berry in your parks, but that is a beast to deal with. Honeysuckle, always, you want to miss always. Plants that we are severely battling. And I know I'm running out of time here, but I'm almost. Oh, this is the densiometer. This is what we would use. And this was a skull that my coworker found while out there reading the tree canopies in Iroquois. it's a really cool tool if you're not familiar with it, but it's this convex mirror, and it has these squares on it with dots in each square, and you can use that to help assess your tree canopy. Why do we do all of this work, and why do we care so much about protecting these parks when users just come in to hike or bike anyway? They can do that whether it's an invasive plant or a native plant, right? But we know better. We know that there are very special plants that are special to this area that are serving the ecosystem in very unique ways. And so here's some bluebells from Cherokee Park. This is a cardinal lobelia I found on Iroquois up top. We have Carolina allspice, just beautiful native plants that we want to see more of, and that really lead to, whether you realize it or not, it leads to a greater and enhanced park experience. More flowers. We've got patches, huge patches of trout lily, especially in Cherokee Park. Both of these pictures were taken in Cherokee Park. I wanted to show you this one because it's a very cute plant, Dutchman's breeches, Dicentra, but it also shows another plant that we battle heavily in the spring, Frankaria, Wetland, Ranunculus. It has these tubers that cling to muddy boots. If you're hiking along the creek and you have muddy boots, it hops in your boots. If there's a huge flood, they get carried down with the water. It's a beast. It's just the matting that has occurred over the years, from what I've heard for people who have been here much longer than I have, has just been surprisingly quick, and it seems we're still trying to figure out the best management practice for that. But briefly, my coworker here, Lauren, is using a backpack sprayer. This is a management technique that we use frequently. We use herbicide in our parks to help deal with the invasive plants as judiciously as we can, as informed as we can. This, I think, was taken in October or November, but this time of year, you'll notice there are no leaves on the trees. Most of the plants here are dead. You'll see some green, hopefully, on your display, but aside from the moss, all the green that you're seeing is bush honeysuckle, Lonicera macchii. So golden hour is what we call the time of year when most native plants and trees have lost their leaves or died back to the ground, and yet so many of the invasives are still green. And so we can foliar applicate without as much disturbance around the plants. We stump treat, we do a lot of chainsaw work. This is a brush cutter. We use these two blades most frequently if we're using woodies, or if we need to cut through some thick grasses. If we're treating Acaranthes trees, tree of heaven, some trees call for different methods of treating. So of course it just depends on what plant we're working with and what plant we're removing. But these are all tools that we use readily. I was going to transition from that awful segment into just the sounds of Iroquois Park spring peepers, but I don't know how to make it play. So just imagine all the spring peepers. It was just deafening, truly, being on top of the hill. This is Iroquois Park. I wanted to transition and show y'all a little bit of our prairies and tell y'all Iroquois has these perched aquifers, wetland habitat up in the prairie. I kind of covered the woodlands. I've kind of covered some of the woodland native plants, but there's also some really beautiful meadow and prairie plants out here. These were both taken from Summit Field. You'll see the false indigo here, the baptisia. I believe this is a prairie sunflower, Helianthus mollis, coming up here and then blooming here. I'm looking back at these pictures and I think that is a correct ID, but I may be wrong about that. But what you can see in the back here is the baptisia has already gone to seed. You'll see rattlesnake master has already flowered and is going to seed. So just any time of the year, even now with everything dead, there's always beautiful things to see. There's always management concerns. You'll see the biggest one with the prairie, like I talked about, is that it wants to become woodlands. So you see the sumac coming in. You might see some sweet gums in here somewhere. Those two woodies are our fiercest woodies when it comes to meadow management. And this is a meadow photo from Cherokee Park that I wanted to share because it's hard to see in this photo. Meadows are some of my favorite things to look at. It's just like a painting that's alive. You'll see some blue stem grass. You've got some rudbeckia down here, remnants of ironwood. I'm sure there was jopieweed in here at some point. But my favorite thing that I saw was this pokeweed, and it's not a good picture of it, but this is a pokeweed, and scattered throughout this landscape is pokeweed, which growing up was such a terrible weed. But seeing it in the meadow, it's like, that's where you belong. And how interesting are you? You are such a cool plant. So I wanted to share that with y'all. And then a final recap of some exciting things that are going on. Our CEO and President, Layla George, she helped acquire this generous gift that happened just a few months ago with some very generous Cherokee Park neighbors that allowed Olmstead Parks Conservancy to actually purchase a piece of land that was going to be developed, and it's now owned by us, and we call it the Beargrass Preserve. And this is just a wonderful thing. It allows us to kind of expand the park by 25 additional acres. And I put here this picture of crested coral root orchid because one of my coworkers, Matt, shared this photo with us, and he let us know that there were 129 stalks of flowering crested coral root on the perimeter of our park that is adjacent to what is now Beargrass Preserve, but would have been this new development. And so it just is a reminder that, you know, these native populations are out there, and they want to live, and they want to be appreciated, and they want to be, you know, they want to exist, and they want to grow. And we are one development away from losing entire populations. And so this is just a really happy thing. And then finally, Matt, who shared the picture of the orchid, also heads up our stewardship program. And if you'll remember, that was a huge part of the master planning process, was encouraging park users to ultimately come in and take ownership of their parks. And so they do a lot of work in the parks with us. There's over 100 active park stewards that have management units that come in regularly and care for them. But over the past year, we had over 1,000 volunteers through corporations and local nonprofits, local high schools, universities, University of Louisville, Bellarmine University, and in 2021, they contributed 7,600 service hours in our parks to help in the management of the woodlands. If you'll remember, we are a staff of, well, there's probably 15 of us total, but there's 5 of us on the team that go out into the woodlands. And so we just can't do it by ourselves, and it will take a village. So that's what we're trying to cultivate. Thank you so much for listening to me and learning about Louisville park programs and Olmsted.
Thank you very much, Mary Ann. That was wonderful. We do have some questions that have queued up, and if you've got a few minutes, we can fire away with a few of those, and you can tell us what you think about them.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, Nola, do you want to unmute yourself and talk about that book?
Oh, sure.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. That was so amazing. I loved listening to, and I actually didn't realize there was an Olmstead Park in Kentucky. So I was thrilled to find this chat tonight. But I actually learned about Frederick Law Olmsted in one of my book clubs. We read Devil in the White City, which was actually about the Chicago World's Fair, but Olmsted had done the landscape for that, right? So yeah. So anyway, the book that that I was curious if everyone else had read, because I absolutely loved it, was oh, what was it called?
The Genius of Place.
Genius of Place by I forgot his name. Justin. I wrote it down, but I can't find my note.
Justin
right now.
Martin.
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah. So I wanted to just recommend that book, because if you haven't read it, not just you, Marianne, but the group in general, it was really a great story of Frederick Law Olmsted.
Thank you so much. I will look it up. I have read Devil in the White City, and that was my introduction to Olmsted as well. I thought that was a wonderful book.
Yeah. Thank you. This was really a great talk. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can add that to our list of candidates for our book clubs. We do 2 or 3. It's an erratic schedule, but we do a few book club meetings each year, so we can look at that one as a possibility. Paul, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Part of the ecological landscaping is to avoid regular gardening, which means regular maintenance, which means always going in to pull weeds. How close are you in some of the gardens that you're doing to getting to the maintenance phase, where you don't really have to worry too much about invasives coming in?
I'm not sure that we will ever get to that point, to be honest. It's hard to imagine. There's a lot of management. And the hardest part, honestly, is you work all day in the parks, and you, like I said, all of our parks are surrounded by neighborhoods. So you leave the park and you've been spraying Frankaria or Honeysuckle all day, and then you look over at the neighbor's lawn, and what do you see in their lawn but exactly what you've been treating? And so unfortunately, I think maintenance, it will be, and in the nature, especially of our creeks with the water systems bringing in invasive plants through that way as well, that there's just ongoing maintenance to be done.
Bless you, because I just took out about 100 square feet of RM honeysuckle yesterday. It was
Well
not
done.
fun. Well, yeah, but I mean, so now, as Richard said, we've cut down to the stump. I probably have to cut some more and chop and then pour some poison into it, because I'm not sure, some of it, the roots are so interconnected, I'm afraid to get too much disturbance if I try to pull them all up at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it's just, that's what I'm worried about, is the ongoing problem of just having them come back. And the same with the euonymus, which I pulled up today.
Yeah. The
Oh,
cut
well.
stump.
So there's no magic formula, right? Just keep cutting and
Keep cutting. But what you said about, it is important. We don't pull, we could forego all chemical use and pull every plant if we thought that was better. But not only does it increase disturbance, but when you increase disturbance, you're turning over the seed bank. And so that plant that's been there for so long and dropped its seeds, you're destroying, propagations of it. So chemical is the least disturbing way sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was glad you showed that picture of the roots, the root that was painted, the stump that was painted.
Mm-hmm.
You can see they use the color, blue color, to see where they spray, and you only need to get the herbicide on the phloem layer near the bark. You don't just waste the time to use the the herbicide in the middle, because that's the dead part of the tree. And then you saw your Acaranthes where you had the chop and spray method. That seems to work pretty well. There was a question in the chat about bush honeysuckle, because that's one of our worst invasives here. And a lot of people, like, we have a program called Weed Wrangle, and a lot of people will use uprooters or weed wrenches to extract the bush honeysuckle from the soil. But that creates so much soil disturbance. You can have erosion issues and just new seeds coming up, next spring. So I do favor the cutting the main trunk 3 inches above the ground and treating with whatever percentage you want to use. I use 18% glyphosate, and it seems to work on bush honeysuckle, but a lot of people like to use a higher percentage. Well, moving along. Oh, I was curious if you ever used prescribed burns to manage your prairies.
So we have in the past. Summit Field on top of Iroquois is the prairie that's an ongoing conversation. It's just really complicated. There's an airport right next to the park, and the air quality has to be a certain level. Louisville tends to have pretty poor air quality. So there's just a lot of red tape involved to actually achieving a prescribed burn, though it is possible, and it is something we hope to do again. In the meantime, this isn't official, but we did just have a meeting about introducing goats to the field to help in our grazing. So I'm really hoping that we'll see some goats up there this year.
Yeah, we have a company here called the Chew Crew, and we've used goats at one of the private wildlife sanctuaries here to get rid of bush honeysuckle in particular. It sort of works, but it's like, it comes back because they're just chewing the top. And so you have to do something to keep it from coming back.
They have goats at Fort Negley now also. I don't know if anybody been there recently, but.
Not recently. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the Chew Crew, I forget the person's name that runs that, seems to be doing a pretty good business. There was another group here a few years ago. I don't think they're in business any longer. Did I miss anything? I probably missed some questions, so feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away.
I
wanted to ask. Go ahead, Donnie.
I was just curious if the parks have lodging, because it would be a bit of a drive, and I would love to hike several of the parks. And is there lodging available there?
There's no lodging in our parks. I thought about just kind of taking a tent in there one night or two, but there's no lodging in our parks, unfortunately.
Okay, I see. So we'd just book nearby then.
Yes,
exactly.
Airbnb, and feel free to reach out if you make it up here. I'd love to walk around with you and show you some of the spots.
Thanks.
I was wondering if you had any contact with Dwayne Estes, the prairie preacher.
I don't.
You might want to look him up.
I can send you his contact information.
He's really into the prairies. He's is he a professor still?
He's a professor of field botany still, but he's also the executive director of the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative.
And Kentucky is certainly part of it.
Absolutely.
He would be able to give you lots and lots of good advice, I'm sure, on managing at least the prairie portions. And I'm sure he'd be excited to take a look at them and see how it fits into his overall picture of the prairies throughout the grasslands throughout the region.
That is a great idea. Thank you so much.
So I recommend him as a resource to contact and say, let him know what you have and that you'd like his expert advice. I'm sure he'll be happy to give it.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Well, I will confess that I've never been to the Olmstead Parks in Louisville. that I know of. I was there a lot as a young child, visiting an uncle and aunt, but I don't know that we went to a park. But I've it's definitely on my list of things to look into now. So I appreciate the way you explain the different parks. And I was going to mention that soon after I met you, I was watching the series called Dickinson. I forget whether it's Netflix or Apple TV Plus, but it's a modern reinterpretation of the life of Emily Dickinson. And not much is known about her because she was quite reclusive. But in one of the scenes, she meets Frederick Law Olmsted in Amherst, and they go on a great long hike. And what they got correct in the series, I think, was Olmsted's idea that you really had to explore and understand the area before you even think about designing anything. And so I thought they made that point pretty well. I'm not recommending the series, but it did have that one. It was actually pretty interesting for me, but it was just a little, when I said a modern interpretation, I mean, it was a little weird.
Okay.
But well done.
Thank you for the that is exactly what I've come to understand about him, is that he really fundamentally understood the nature that existed before the civilization around it, and how that needed to function and how to best take care for it. I think that's
right.
I would just like to say also, extend an invitation. So I come from an educational art background. I taught high school arts for 37 years. So native plants is relatively new to me. I'm about 4 years in, but I love supporting work of people like you. And I have a very large home, and my roommate is a chef, and you could have my lower level if you ever need a place to stay in Nashville.
Thank you so much. That is very kind. I wanted to mention also, for those of you that are saying that you've never been to an Olmstead Park, if you've been to Bernheim Forest, you've been to an Olmstead Park, because that's designed by the Olmsted brothers firm as well.
And where is that?
That is in Claremont, Kentucky. It's about 20 miles south of Louisville, so you would pass it before you hit Louisville.
I see.
Well, Marianne, thank you again. I'm so glad you agreed to meet with us and tell us about Frederick Law Olmsted and the park system there in Louisville. And I'm sure you'll find a few of us wandering in the woods up there someday.
Please say hello. We would be glad to have you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bernheim Forest is on Highway 65, exit 112, and it's a wonderful interruption if you have to drive north to on 65 endlessly. And Bernheim Forest is a wonderful place with educational things, and so I usually, if I stop on a trip, I usually delay myself that I get too late home or something like that. By late home, I mean 10, 11 o'clock. So Bernheim Forest is a great thing to go, and it's a big park, and
there's a cafe that you can eat lunch at. It's hiking trail. It's beautiful. It's wonderful.
Even a wheelchair garden now. And the visitor center is lined with Kentucky coffee tree wood, Gymnocladus dioicus. Fascinating.
Well, thank you, Alice.
Thank you all. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to end the meeting,
Marianne.
but thank everybody for coming. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.